Sometimes the greatest monsters aren't hiding in shadows. They're standing in plain sight, wearing a friendly face, carrying credentials we trust. But when darkness falls, they become something else entirely. This is The Midnight File. I'm Julian Cross, and tonight we're opening a case that haunted an entire nation for 2 decades. Before we begin, I want you to know something. This story is real. Every word you're about to hear comes from case files, court documents, and investigative records from one of Germany's most disturbing criminal investigations. This isn't fiction. This happened, and for nearly 20 years, no one could stop it. We're working towards something here at the Midnight File. A small goal perhaps, but meaningful. We are trying to reach 100 subscribers. People who want to hear these stories told the way they deserve to be told. With respect, with detail, with the weight they carry. If that sounds like you, the subscribe button is right there. Help us get to 100. Help us build something that matters. And I want to know something else. Where are you right now? Where in the world has this video reached you? Are you listening in London at midnight? In New York as the sun sets? In Tokyo as morning breaks? Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. These stories travel further than we imagine, and I want to know how far this one goes. Now here's what I'm asking. If this story affects you the way I think it will, if it stays with you after the screen goes dark, give us a like. We're hoping for 20 on this video. 20 people who felt something. 20 people who understand why these cases matter. It's a small thing, but it tells me you're listening. It tells me these files are worth opening. All right, let's begin. The case I'm about to share with you spans 3 countries, nearly 20 years, and involves a predator so methodical, so patient, that he operated in the spaces between institutional authority, slipping through cracks that should never have existed. They called him the Masked Man, the Black Man, der Maskenmann, and by the time they caught him, the damage was already done. This is the story of Martin Ney, and this is how he got away with it for so long. March 3rd, 1992, Heppstedt. A small community near Bremen in northern Germany. Snow still clings to the edges of the forest. The air is cold, sharp. Inside a children's home, life follows its familiar rhythm. Meals, classes, the supervision of young lives away from their families. These are children in care, vulnerable, dependent on the adults around them to keep them safe. That night, a classroom supervisor is making her rounds. She opens the door to an empty dormitory, and there, standing in the half-light, is a figure, a man, masked, dressed entirely in black. For a moment, neither moves. Then the figure turns and runs, gone before anyone can react, before questions can even form. Days pass. The facility tightens security, but not by much. A lock here, better lighting there. The incident is logged. Concerning, yes, but isolated. Probably someone from outside, a vagrant, a confused individual. It won't happen again. But it does. Days later, the masked man returns. This time he doesn't just stand there. He approaches an 11-year-old boy, touches him. The child screams. The figure flees again. Now the facility is alarmed. Police are called. Descriptions are taken. Male, average height, always masked, always at night. They install a motion detector. They upgrade the door lock system. And then it happens again and again. Between April and June of 1992, the masked figure appears multiple times. Always at night, always in the dormitories. He touches children inappropriately. He watches them. He speaks to them in whispers. Each time, he grows bolder. Each time he stays a little longer. By August, the escalation becomes unmistakable. He's no longer just touching. He's waking multiple children, assaulting them. In September, he approaches a boy at his bedside and demands he remove his clothing. In October, he moves from bed to bed, speaking to 5 boys in sequence. 3 of them he assaults, and still, he is not caught. What's remarkable here, what should chill you to the bone, is not just what happened, but what didn't happen. The response was inadequate. Motion detectors and better locks. That's what stood between these children and a predator who was learning, adapting, perfecting his approach. No manhunt, no task force, no recognition that this was the beginning of something far worse. Because at the same time, March 1992, another children's home was experiencing the same nightmare. Badenstedt, in Zeven. A masked man attempted to assault a 13-year-old. By August, he was back. The pattern was identical, the descriptions matched. Two facilities, the same predator, and police suspected they might be connected. Suspected, but did not pursue that connection with the urgency it demanded. You see, that's the first crack, the first failure. Two facilities reporting the same intruder, the same methods, the same timing, and yet the cases sat in separate files, in separate districts, treated as isolated incidents rather than what they were. A systematic campaign by someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And then, in the midst of these attacks, something else happened. Something that turned this from a case of repeated assault into something darker. A boy went missing. His name was Stefan Jahr, 13 years old, a student at a boarding school called Eichenschule in Schiessel. On March 15, 1992, Stefan disappeared. No struggle, no witnesses. One moment he was there, and then he simply wasn't. His family reported him missing. Search parties were organized. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into a month. Then, on April 13th, a body was found in the Verden forest, buried, hands tied behind the back. It was Stefan. The autopsy revealed he had been strangled. Manually, someone had wrapped their hands around a 13-year-old boy's throat and squeezed until his life ended. Then they tied his hands, dug a grave among the trees, and covered him with earth. At the time, investigators did not connect Stefan's case to the masked intruder terrorizing nearby children's homes. Different crime, different method. Missing persons cases often lead to tragic ends. But this seemed like something else. A targeted abduction, a specific victim. They were wrong, because Stefan Jahr's fate was sealed the moment he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. A car, a license plate, a face, perhaps, for just a second. The man who took Stefan's life would later confess that he had one reason for doing what he did. Self-preservation. Stefan could identify him. Stefan had to disappear. This was not a crime of passion. This was calculated elimination, and it was only the beginning. Let me pause here for a moment. If you're still with me, if this story is pulling you in the way these cases pull at me, consider subscribing. We're building something here at the Midnight File, a place where these stories are told with the care and attention they deserve, where victims are remembered, where truth matters. Click that button, join us, because the files I have waiting are darker still. 3 years pass. The attacks at the children's homes continue sporadically, reported, investigated half-heartedly. The masked man comes and goes like a ghost. Authorities still haven't connected all the pieces. And then, in 1995, he takes another child. Dennis Rostel, 8 years old, taken from a tent camp near Schleswig in the summer, a place where children should be safe, where families send their kids to experience nature, make friends, sleep under canvas, and wake to birdsong. Dennis never came home, but unlike Stefan, Dennis wasn't taken quickly, wasn't ended immediately. No, this time the predator did something that reveals just how confident he'd become, how untouchable he felt. He drove Dennis across the border, into Denmark, across a guarded checkpoint, with a child in his vehicle, and no one stopped him, no one questioned, no one looked twice. They spent several days together in a holiday cottage. Days. Imagine that. Imagine the fear, the confusion, the hope. Perhaps that this would end differently. It didn't. Eventually the man strangled Dennis, suffocated him, made sure he was gone. Then he left the small body where it would eventually be found. 2 weeks later, Danish authorities discovered Dennis Rostel's remains. The investigation struggled. Cross-border crimes always do. Jurisdictional complications, language barriers, different legal systems. The case went cold. Another tragedy. Another unsolved disappearance turned fatal. Another family destroyed. But someone knew the truth. Someone was out there, living his life, going to work, interacting with neighbors and colleagues, carrying the weight of 2 taken lives and dozens of violated childhoods. And no one suspected him. Years pass. The calendar turns into a new millennium. The world changes. Technology advances. Investigative techniques improve. DNA databases expand. And still, the masked man operates. April 10th, 2001. 9 years after Stefan Jahr, 6 years after Dennis Rostel. A school holiday camp near Bremerhaven. Children playing, learning, experiencing the kind of freedom that comes with supervised adventure away from home. Dennis Klein, 9 years old, full of life. That night he was taken from the camp, abducted by the same man who had been doing this for nearly a decade. But Dennis was different. Dennis fought back. When the assault began, Dennis Klein resisted. He struggled. He made it difficult. And in that struggle, something snapped. The man who had taken him couldn't risk the noise, couldn't risk discovery, couldn't afford another witness who might identify him. So he ended it. Right there. Dennis Klein lost his life, not because the predator wanted to take it, but because Dennis refused to be a silent victim. The body was found weeks later in nearby shrubbery. Another child gone. Another investigation launched. And this time, finally, authorities began to wonder if these cases might be connected. A task force was created. SOCO Dennis, they called it. Special Commission Dennis, named for the most recent victim. They began comparing cases, looking at timelines, mapping locations. And slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged. 3 boys, similar ages. All taken from institutional settings, schools, camps, homes, all in northern Germany. All victims of someone with intimate knowledge of these facilities. Someone who scouted locations beforehand. Someone who knew which children slept where. Someone who arrived prepared. But even with this recognition, even with a task force dedicated to finding connections, the investigation stalled. Because the man they were looking for was careful, meticulous, patient. And he had one advantage that made him nearly invisible. He was trusted. Martin Ney worked as a pedagogue, a youth worker. His entire professional life was built around children. He had legitimate access to schools, camps, recreational facilities. He attended training sessions with other youth workers. He participated in institutional meetings. He was part of the system designed to protect children, which meant he knew that system inside and out. He understood its weaknesses, its blind spots, the times when supervision was lightest, the moments when doors were left unlocked, the patterns of shift changes and nightly rounds. He was hiding in plain sight, and for nearly 20 years, no one saw him. Let me share something with you, something that investigators would later acknowledge when trying to understand how this happened, how one man could operate for 2 decades without being caught. Martin Ney was stopped multiple times during routine investigations. Multiple times. Traffic stops, background checks connected to facilities where he worked, standard inquiries that police conduct constantly. And every time, he passed. Every time he was cleared. Every time he walked away. One victim's file, one crucial piece of evidence that could have connected earlier cases, sat in a police evidence locker for years before anyone thought to compare it with other cases. Years. While children continued to be victimized, while families continued to suffer, the evidence that might have stopped it all was filed away, gathering dust. Interagency communication was virtually non-existent. The attacks in Hepstedt weren't compared with the attacks in Badenstedt. Stefan Jahr's case in Schiessel wasn't linked to Dennis Rostel's in Schleswig or Dennis Klein's in Bremerhaven. Different districts, different case numbers, different investigators working in isolation. This is how predators thrive. Not because they're brilliant, not because they're uniquely evil, but because the systems designed to stop them are fractured, underfunded, poorly coordinated, because we assume someone else is making the connection, because we file away what we can't immediately solve and move on to the next crisis. And Martin Ney understood this better than anyone. If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, if this story is affecting you, share this video. Send it to someone who watches true crime, someone who asks the hard questions, someone who understands that these stories matter not just because they're dark, but because they reveal something about how our systems work, or don't work. Share it. helped these stories reach further. The attacks continued throughout the 2000s. Not just the 3 confirmed cases that ended in death, but dozens of others. Investigators would eventually confirm at least 40 to 45 sexual assaults, 40 to 45 children violated by the same man across multiple facilities over multiple years. The pattern was always the same: nocturnal invasions, masked appearance, targeting of boys in institutional settings, escalating behavior. And each time Ney would disappear before anyone could respond effectively, back to his normal life, back to his work with children, back to being trusted. But here's what's truly disturbing. What should keep you awake tonight? Investigators believe the actual number of victims is significantly higher. 40 to 45 is just what they could confirm, what they could document, what victims came forward to report. How many didn't? How many children carried that trauma silently? How many attacks in other regions during the 1990s were attributed to different perpetrators or investigated in isolation, never connected to Ney because no one was looking at the bigger picture? We'll never know. That's the truth that sits at the center of this case like a stone. We'll never know the full scope of what Martin Ney did. We can only measure what we found. And what about other countries? Because Ney's crimes didn't stop at Germany's borders. In April 2004, 10-year-old Jonathan Coulomb was abducted from a school holiday camp in Bréville-les-Pins in western France. His body was found more than a month later, bound and weighted down with a concrete block in a pond. French authorities investigated. They pursued leads, but the case went cold. No suspects, no resolution. Another child gone. Another family shattered. Years later, while imprisoned in Germany, Ney allegedly confessed to another inmate that he had taken Jonathan Coulomb's life. He later retracted that confession, denied it completely. But investigators had other evidence. Evidence solid enough that in 2021, Ney was extradited to France to face charges for Jonathan's case. Think about that timeline. 2004. Martin Ney was still operating, still taking children across international borders, still confident that he wouldn't be caught. And he was right. Not until 7 years later would anyone even know his name. But the international connections don't stop there. In 1998, 11-year-old Nicky Verstappen disappeared from a summer camp in Brunssen in the Netherlands. His body was found the next day in Langbroek. The case devastated the Dutch nation and remained unsolved for decades. Martin Ney was investigated as a potential suspect. His pattern fit. His timeline matched. But eventually, another individual, Joseph Britt, was arrested and charged for Nicky's case. Whether Ney was actually involved remains unclear. The truth sits somewhere in those files, and we may never access it completely. And then there's the case that captured international attention like no other. Madeleine McCann, 3 years old, disappeared from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, in May 2007. For a brief period, Martin Ney was even considered as a potential suspect. German prosecutors eventually focused on another man, Christian Bruckner, for that investigation. But the fact that Ney's name came up at all reveals something crucial. His pattern of targeting children, his willingness to travel internationally, his ability to blend into tourist areas and family-oriented spaces, all of it made him a viable suspect for cases across Europe. How many other unsolved cases might connect to Martin Ney? How many files in how many countries contain his shadow without anyone realizing it? I want you to think about something. We're halfway through this story, and if you've made it this far, you're invested, you're listening, you care about these details, about these lives. If that's true, hit the like button. Let me know you're here. Let me know these stories matter to you the way they matter to me. We're hoping for 20 likes on this video. Be one of them. February 2011. Nearly 20 years after Stefan Jahr disappeared. Nearly 16 years after Dennis Rostel was taken across the Danish border. Nearly 10 years after Dennis Klein fought for his life in Bremerhaven. Police released a sketch, based on witness descriptions, based on the type of vehicle seen near one victim, based on fragments of memory from people who had seen something but didn't realize its significance at the time. The sketch circulated. Television documentaries aired. The case gained renewed attention, and someone was watching. someone who had been carrying a burden for a decade. An eyewitness came forward, someone who had been jogging near the location where Dennis Klein was taken in 2001. They had seen something. A man. A vehicle. Details that seemed irrelevant at the time, but had haunted them ever since. After seeing the documentary, after seeing the sketch, they realized what they knew might matter. Investigators followed the lead, traced the vehicle description, built a profile. And on April 15, 2011, they made an arrest. Martin Ney, 40 years old, youth worker, pedagogue, a man whose entire career was built around helping children. He confessed, not immediately, not easily, but eventually, piece by piece, Martin Ney admitted what he had done. 3 confirmed cases ending in death. Stefan Jahr, Dennis Rostel, Dennis Klein. Approximately 40 other children violated. 2 decades of systematic predation. The trial began. Evidence was presented. Testimonies were heard. And on February 27, 2012, the State District Court delivered its verdict. Life imprisonment, with a special notation. The particular severity of his guilt. In German law, this designation means something specific. It means that even life imprisonment may not be enough. That parole, typically possible after 15 years, would be far more difficult to obtain, perhaps impossible. The judge, in delivering the sentence, said something remarkable, something that speaks to the complicated nature of justice and humanity. He looked at Martin Ney and said, "You are and remain a human being. The term creature is not to be used. You are a human being who, despite this verdict, can still hope." I think about those words often, about what they mean, about the line between justice and vengeance, about how we're supposed to reconcile the humanity of someone who did such inhuman things. Because Martin Ney is human. That's what makes this so terrifying. He's not a monster from a nightmare. He's not supernatural. He's a person who made choices, who calculated risks, who exploited trust for nearly 20 years. And that person looks like anyone, works alongside anyone, could be anyone. After his conviction, the revelations continued. The investigation expanded. Connections to other cases were explored. And the uncomfortable truth settled in. Martin Ney had been stoppable at multiple points. The system had opportunities, and the system failed the children in those homes in 1992 when the attacks were treated as isolated incidents rather than a pattern. Failed Stefan Jahr when no one connected his disappearance to the masked intruder operating in nearby facilities. Failed Dennis Rostel when a child was driven across an international border without anyone noticing. Failed Dennis Klein when nearly a decade passed before a task force was even created. The systemic failures are as much a part of this story as Martin Ney himself. Because without those failures, this story might have ended in 1992. 40 children might have been spared. 3 families might still be whole. But that's not what happened. And we have to sit with that. I want to know something from you. Leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking right now. Tell me if this case makes you angry, sad, afraid, thoughtful. Tell me if you see these patterns in other cases. Tell me if you work in child protection and this hits differently for you. I read every comment. Everyone. And your thoughts matter. Martin Ney is currently serving his sentence in Germany, life imprisonment with special severity notation. But his story continues to ripple outward. Because cases like this change things. They force institutions to examine their protocols. They demand better communication between agencies. They reveal the cracks that predators exploit. After Ney's arrest and conviction, German authorities fundamentally changed how they approach serial crime investigation. Information-sharing protocols were improved. Pattern recognition systems were enhanced. Training for youth workers and institutional staff was expanded. Red flags that might have been dismissed before are now taken more seriously. These changes matter. They save lives. But they came too late for Stefan, Dennis, and all the others, whose names we know and don't know. There's something else worth considering, something that investigators struggled with throughout this case and continue to wrestle with even now. Martin Ney was intelligent, organized, patient. He planned his crimes meticulously. He waited years between major escalations. He studied his targets and their environments before acting. This wasn't a disorganized individual operating on impulse. This was someone who understood risk management, who adapted to security measures, who learned from near misses and adjusted his approach. That level of calculation, that degree of patience, it's rare, and it's precisely what made him so dangerous. Because while most criminals leave obvious trails, make impulsive mistakes, get caught relatively quickly, Ney operated like someone playing a very long game, a game he thought he could win indefinitely. But here's what he didn't account for: memory. The way certain details stick with people. The way a jogger carries the image of a man near a school camp for 10 years. The way witnesses eventually come forward when the pieces suddenly click into place. He also didn't account for persistence, for investigators who refused to let these cases go cold, who kept files active even when leads dried up, who compared notes across districts and eventually saw the pattern he thought he'd hidden so well. And he didn't account for change, for the way technology and methodology improve, for DNA databases and digital records and enhanced communication systems that make it harder, year by year, for predators to operate in the shadows. Martin Ney was caught because the world changed around him, because the methods that worked in 1992 didn't work as well in 2011, because eventually, inevitably, the net tightened. But it took 20 years. And that's what haunts me. That's what should haunt all of us. If this story has affected you, if it's made you think about vulnerability and trust and how we protect the people who can't protect themselves, subscribe to this channel. Because I'm not done telling these stories, I'm not done opening these files, and I need to know there are people out there who want to hear them, who understand why they matter. Click that button. Join this community. Help us reach 100 subscribers and beyond. There's a question that sits at the center of every case I investigate. Why? Why did this person do what they did? What breaks in someone to make them capable of such calculated harm? With Martin Ney, the answer is both simple and inadequate. He did it because he wanted to, because he was attracted to children, because he had access and opportunity, because he was willing to prioritize his desires over others' safety and well-being. But that doesn't really answer the question, does it? It doesn't explain the patience, the planning, the escalation from inappropriate touching to crossing international borders with victims. It doesn't explain the coldness required to strangle a 13-year-old boy because he might have seen a license plate. Psychological profiles were conducted. Experts testified. The court heard testimony about Ney's background, his development, his psychological state. And still, the core question remains murky. What makes someone capable of this? I don't have an answer. I'm not sure anyone does. What I do have is the facts, the timeline, the evidence, the outcomes, and the knowledge that while Martin Ney is imprisoned, the vulnerabilities he exploited still exist. Children are still in institutional care, summer camps still operate, youth workers still have access, and somewhere, statistically speaking, another predator is studying those systems, looking for weaknesses, planning their own terrible campaign. That's not meant to frighten you. It's meant to make you vigilant, aware, engaged with the question of how we protect vulnerable populations from those who would harm them. Because the truth is, most youth workers are good people. Most camps are safe. Most institutions have strong safeguards, but not all. And the ones that don't, the ones with outdated protocols and poor communication and inadequate supervision, those are the ones that attract people like Martin Ney. So what do? We demand better. We ask questions. We don't accept "it won't happen here" as an answer. We support funding for child protection services. We train people to recognize warning signs. We create cultures where children feel safe reporting inappropriate behavior. We build systems that share information across jurisdictional boundaries. We learn from cases like this. And we do better. Martin Ney's case represents a particular nightmare. The trusted authority figure who betrays that trust systematically over decades, the institutional failures that enable harm, the interagency communication breakdowns that let patterns go unrecognized. But it also represents hope, because he was caught, because the system, however slowly, eventually worked, because families got answers, even if those answers came far too late, because changes were made that will protect future children. That's the complicated truth at the heart of true crime, the balance between horror and resolution, between acknowledging evil and celebrating the often mundane investigative work that eventually brings it to light. The officers who kept Stefan Jahr's case active for years. The witness who came forward a decade after seeing something near where Dennis Klein disappeared. The investigators who finally connected the dots across districts and years. The prosecutors who built a case strong enough to convict. The judge who delivered a sentence that acknowledged the severity of what had been done. These are the people who stopped Martin Ney. Not dramatically, not instantaneously, but eventually, determinedly, they did. And now his story serves a purpose, as a warning, as a case study, as a reminder of what happens when systems fail and what's possible when they finally function. Before I close this file, I want you to do something for me. Share this video with someone. A friend who watches true crime. A family member who works in education or child services. Someone who needs to understand that these cases aren't just entertainment. They're real. They're instructive. They matter. And leave a comment. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what struck you about this case. Tell me if you learned something you didn't know. I'm here. I'm listening. This community we're building, it's about more than just consuming stories. It's about engaging with them, understanding them, learning from them. So here we are, the end of the file. Martin Ney's story told, 3 young lives lost, dozens more scarred, 2 decades of systematic predation, and finally justice. Imperfect, late, but justice nonetheless. The families of Stefan Jahr, Dennis Rostel, and Dennis Klein live with a loss that never heals. They have answers now. They know who and why and how, but that knowledge doesn't bring their children back, doesn't erase the years of not knowing, doesn't fill the holes those boys left behind. The other survivors, the ones who lived but carry the trauma of what was done to them, they continue their own struggles. Some have spoken publicly, others remain private. All of them are owed our recognition and respect, and Martin Ney sits in a cell, serving a sentence that will likely last the rest of his life. Whether he feels remorse, we don't know. Whether he's capable of understanding the full scope of the harm he caused, that remains unclear. What we know is that he can't hurt anyone else. And perhaps that's enough. Every town keeps a secret. Some just bury it deeper than others. For 20 years, Northern Germany's secret walked among them, trusted and unnoticed, until one day, finally, someone looked closely enough to see what had been hiding in plain sight. If stories like this stay with you, if they change how you see the world, subscribe to the Midnight File. Because I have more files to open, more cases that need to be told, more truths that deserve to be heard. This has been the Midnight File. I'm Julian Cross. And remember, sometimes the darkness wears a familiar face. Sometimes it carries credentials we're taught to trust. Sometimes it operates for years before anyone realizes it's there. Stay vigilant. Ask questions. Protect the vulnerable. The next file may keep you up tonight.